episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest today, involved in creating a better tomorrow on many different fronts. Today's show, we have the honor of being joined by Trent Stamp, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Eisner Foundation, which is an organization that was founded by Jane and Michael Eisner, who former chairman and chief executive officer of the Walt Disney Company. And the foundation identifies, advocates for, and invests in high quality and innovative programs that unite multiple generations for the enrichment of our communities. And we are going to step further into this theme that we've gone into on previous shows in terms of intergenerational dynamics. Trent has been in this role since 2008. And under his leadership, the Eisner Foundation has become the only foundation in the United States investing solely in these intergenerational solutions, garnering many honors along the way and awards, including Generations United Leadership Award. Trent is recognized as one of America's leading experts in healthy aging and the benefits of intergenerational programs, and he has been published on aging issues in a variety of forums, from Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Next Avenue, presented at South by Southwest and the American Society on Aging's annual conference, among others, serves as a board member for Grantmakers in Aging, and is on the Milken Institute Center for the Future of Aging, Board of Academic and Policy Advisors. Previously, Trent was the founding president of Charity Navigator, the nation's largest and most used evaluator of American charities and nonprofits. He was vice president of communications at Teach for America, presidential management fellow for the Social Security Administration, and a legislative aide for U.S. Representative Robert Matsui. He started his career as a Teach for America teacher in rural North Carolina. He has appeared as an expert analyst on numerous television and radio shows, including the Today Show, 2020, Good Morning America, and The Daily Show. Has his master's in public policy from Duke, his BA in law and society from University of California, Santa Barbara. Trent Stamp, thanks so much for taking the time to come talk to us today.
Wow, Ira, that is spectacular. I thank you for that introduction, clearly written by my mother. But it's a genuine honor to be here, and I do want to thank you up front for just the advocacy you've been doing recently on intergenerational programs. I know you've talked to Donna Butts and to Juan Williams, and I'm happy to follow up on them and hopefully not be redundant with the things that they've said. But thank you for shining a light on what is a very important part of healthy aging.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that from you. I'd love to start off like we typically do. I'd love to hand the floor for a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit more about yourself. If you could sort of take us back a little earlier to sort of everything from where you grew up, a little bit of your early journey and how you got personally so interested, and you've been involved in this since 2008, the Eisner Foundation, but how sort of the topic of intergenerationality became so important to you to devote so much of your career to it.
Sure. I grew up in California. I'm a California kid. I went to public schools in California, in Oakland, and then in Carmel, and then at UC Santa Barbara. And then I was lucky enough back in the day when it wasn't the most prestigious program in the country to get into Teach for America and be sent off to rural North Carolina to teach. So I've always had interests in equity, in diversity, in equality. It was just brought to me as a child by hippie parents in California in the 70s. So when I was given the opportunity to run the Eisner Foundation in 2008, I had previously been involved in several nonprofits, Teach for America, as you said, as a vice president, and then I started Charity Navigator, which evaluated a bunch of nonprofits and tried to be a donor's tool, but allowed me to really see the backside of the nonprofit world. When I was offered the opportunity to be on the giving side, to invest in nonprofits, I jumped at it because, obviously this was a unique opportunity, and the Eisners have been unbelievably generous with my family and with their philanthropy, and it's been a true honor to work here. So when I came to the Eisner Foundation in 2008, it was not long after Michael had left Disney. And the foundation was exclusively focused on children's related issues for obvious reasons. I mean, he'd been coming from from Disneyland and from Disney videos and everything like that. So it made all the sense in the world that their philanthropy would be investing in children that were not as fortunate as those who got to go to Disneyland all the time. And I asked the question of, are we giving to kids because they're cute and they're little, or are we giving to kids because they need some advocacy and they need some help, and they need somebody on their side who can provide them with opportunities and access? And the family, of course, with a leading question like that, said it's the latter. And so I said, if that's the case, perhaps we should add seniors as a focus also, because too often our seniors have some of those same commonalities that kids have at risk in our society, and need some advocacy and need a helping hand, and need somebody that's going to be on their side. And so we added seniors to our focus. And for a good 4 or 5 years, we had 2 distinct portfolios. We gave about 80% of our corpus to children's related charities and 20% to senior related organizations. And just as a happy accident, over time, we found that the organizations that we liked the best, that we found to be the most effective, to be the most efficient, that were bringing about the biggest bang for the buck, were organizations that were working with those 2 groups simultaneously, not just to serve both groups, but to use both groups as resources. So, those organizations that were doing the best job of raising 3rd grade reading scores were those organizations that had dialed in and had recruited a bunch of active senior volunteers who were serving as great tutors and mentors and as reading advisors. Those organizations that were doing the best job of working with seniors who were isolated and were suffering with the great health effects that come with being socially isolated were the ones that were recruiting high school kids and teenagers, college kids, to get out there and go into those buildings and work with those seniors who were isolated, who were using technology to reach out to them. So we ended up essentially deciding that we wanted to be exclusively an intergenerational funder, but we didn't come to it because we were trying to be an intergenerational funder. We came to it because we thought that the best way to work with vulnerable seniors and with vulnerable kids was by bringing those 2 groups together and creating not only a benefit for the 2 as entities, but for society as a whole. The trite equation we use of 1 + 1 = 3. And so we've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years. It has given us an obvious lane in which to work in. We believe we're the only foundation in the United States that exclusively invests in intergenerational programming. There are some others that spend a good deal of money in intergenerational programs. The RRF Foundation in Chicago, the Packard Foundation here in California, but they have other giving portfolios that they invest in. We only look for intergenerational programs. And I think it's been great. It's allowed us to, to really bring about some good impact, to really know our grantees well, to become subject matter experts, and to serve as as an advocate for this type of work. So it's been it's been a good lane for us in which to work, and it's obviously a growth industry, as you know better than anybody. America is aging and aging fast, and we can figure out a way to put that aging population to work and utilize them as resources and not look at them as finished, but as people who have a lot to offer to our society as a whole. Or we can look at it as this, brewing silver tsunami, which threatens to wreck our social systems in some way whatsoever, and die an unhappy death. So we want to be optimists, we want to be advocates, and we want to figure out ways to put this particular growing population to work on behalf of our society, and specifically on behalf of children and children at risk.
Outstanding. And along these lines, and so going on some of these themes now, I've read a lot of what you've written recently. You've been interviewed for a couple pieces in the Milken Foundation materials. One piece specifically, we were to talk about loneliness and sort of, you make this point. We've all been here during this pandemic. We want to go work. We want to learn. We want to have some more purpose. But at the core of it all, as you say, is we just don't want to be alone. This is a wrong feeling. It's not natural. One of the groups that you work with at the Eisner Foundation is the Dorot Foundation, which is specifically, I believe, focused on this concept of social isolation and what we can do to get away from it. Can you talk a little bit about sort of loneliness in general, and then some of what you look at the foundation as you put your funds into these other initiatives?
Yeah, there's a relatively recent English study which shows that loneliness is essentially the equivalent of smoking 18 cigarettes a day for your long-term health. It has debilitating and pervasive effects on the body, and will accelerate your decline and even your death as fast as any other externality that we're aware of. So it's a very, very, very real issue. AARP has estimated literally billions in healthcare costs for the United States associated with loneliness. So even if you weren't worried about it from a societal impact, if you were just worried about it from a fiscal standpoint, we do think that we have an obligation to address this loneliness issue. Technology hasn't fixed it. People are lonelier than ever, despite the fact that they have, Facebook coming into their house. In fact, it may be exacerbating it and making it worse when you see, other people having fun far away who are not you. But it is a uniquely intergenerational solution. We have found in our society that the two loneliest groups in our society are the young and the old. And so it's just, some of this, you read off, my fancy degree earlier on from some fancy school. Some of this is just not rocket science. Right. We have really lonely people, and we have a solution, which is that we have a bunch of other people who would like to figure out a way to make those people less lonely. So one of the organizations that we have worked with is Dorot, which is an organization in New York City, which has been for 4 or 5 decades working with kind of the invisible senior population of New York, which are the elderly living primarily in high-rise apartments, who don't have any social interaction on a regular basis from their families or a social worker or a friend group. Perhaps they're immobile in some ways or another, or are dramatically reduced in their mobility. And we all know that those things become even more of a challenge in winter and times when it's hard to get around the city. So Dorot has a whole bunch of programs now designed to address that loneliness. But originally it just was as simple as sending college students primarily from Columbia into those buildings, looking for older people and trying to figure out if there was a way to make a connection. And while you're making that connection, of course, to do the more sophisticated things like seeing if you can connect them to a doctor, connect them to a healthy meals program, connect them to an outreach group where they can connect with other seniors and those types of things. But the single first step is simply a knock on the door. And Dorot now, of course, it's 2021 and they have all the technology and all the, sophisticated applications and all the things that you could possibly do. But at its simplest, it's bringing young people together for the betterment of older people who are socially isolated, who could use some connection in their society. And so we've done a series of those types of organizations. Mm-hmm. That's just a well-known one in New York City that we invested in and gave our Eisner Prize to a few years ago for the best intergenerational organization in the United States. But we, when COVID hit here, we launched a rapid response grant program with a turnaround time of 5 days, which is simply unheard of in the philanthropic world, where we were getting money out the door to organizations that we thought could spend it well. And all of it had to be around this idea of social isolation. We weren't going to all of a sudden start feeding people or creating vaccines or doing things that, may have been needed, but weren't in our expertise. We knew about social isolation. We knew what the good technology was. We knew who the good leaders were. We knew where the problems were. And so we made about 30 grants in a month, all of them designed around social isolation and technology and trying to figure out ways to connect older and younger people. And we're very proud of the work that we did after that. But it's a genuine health crisis in our country.
And obviously, you know a lot about sort of these themes of loneliness and the importance of the connections. Another obvious sort of strong component of the sort of the Eisner experience, the lineage, is the entertainment industry. And another relationship that I read about, is with your organization and the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which it's a fascinating organization because I think of sort of Hollywood having these problems, but there's obviously there's the actors, but then there's everyone else that has supported them, and these people, they need help, they need a nursing care, memory care, and so forth. And it's a really fascinating organization specifically dedicated to these needs in this specific population in the entertainment field. Can you talk a little bit about MPTF and a little bit of your work with them as well?
Sure. That's another Eisner Prize winner from way back. And yeah, you're absolutely right. When I first moved to LA 13 years ago, I routinely ran into people who talked about how they worked in the industry. And I was naive enough for about the first 6 months to have no idea what the heck that was. I don't know. I grew up in Oakland. I don't know what the industry is, but it was obviously the entertainment industry. And, the vast majority of people who work in the industry are not Brad Pitt and George Clooney, and they're people who work hard and toil away. And, nowadays, more and more of them are contract workers and day workers and these types of things. So it's no different than if you had an organization that was looking to help out people from any other particular industry, in the sense it's just here in California and in Southern California, it's so pervasive. But the MPTF and the MPTF Fund, Motion Picture Television Fund, home is it's a good organization. It's a good, solid organization that has worked for a long time with a very vulnerable population, and has done things as simple as run a senior home and those types of things and those kinds of outreach activities. But what we've been working with them recently about is, again, on this social isolation thing, is that they've created a technology, a platform called a call hub software, which would allow any organization, and not just them, and they have totally used it as open source and made it available to all of our grantees at the Eisner Foundation, which just simply allows a volunteer who wants to help to connect with a homebound senior via the telephone and have all of the bells and whistles that you would want before, like I said before, the ability to connect them to a doctor, the ability to connect them to a social worker, those types of things, the ability to allow referrals and follow-ups and check-ins and healthy check-ins and all those kinds of things, with the added level of security that, of course, we need that you would normally vet a organization for when they have new in-person volunteers. You get a volunteer, you think they're a pretty good volunteer, you trust them, you've put them through the rigorous thing, but we all know there is the potential for something to go awry when that person calls somebody and they start talking about helping with their banking and these types of things. So the MPTF software, the call hub stuff, completely eliminates the ability to do that, completely eliminates, your ability to get personal information, allows the inability to connect in anything other this particular platform, allows for anonymity, all the kinds of things. So it brings the good side of connecting with people via technology without any of the negative consequences or concerns. And like I said, because it was a nonprofit program, when we originally invested in it for their particular population, one of the things that we put into that grant was that they make it available to any other nonprofit that wanted to utilize the software for reaching out to their vulnerable population. something you wouldn't necessarily see in a for-profit kind of technology. If you invested in the Google technology, they're not going to immediately share it with Apple.
Right.
But MPTF did share it with all the other people in Southern California that wanted to connect with their constituency, their homebound seniors, via technology and via volunteers over phone, but didn't necessarily have the platform to do it. So again, it's pretty good work. It's not rocket science. It's how do you reach out and connect with older people without creating some of the risks that would come from those types of things if you can't oversee every interaction, when it's happening on site at your location, but you're going to disperse people to make these kinds of phone calls and trust that it's going to happen, because you can't even bring them in to work from a phone bank. They're going to do it from their own particular home. There are very real concerns that need to be addressed, even though 99.99999% of the volunteers are 1,000% into it for the right reason and want to make the world a better place and protect vulnerable citizens. So, but that's good work, and we're proud of it. It's not. It's not creating a new grain that's going to, eliminate, famine in Africa, but it's a really cool, safe phone system that allows young college kids to call seniors and see what they need to help them and to just talk to them for a little while.
It works and it solves the problem,
Temporarily,
it's an elegant approach. There's nothing wrong with that. So, Trent, in you and Donna Butts, who I had on a show a couple of weeks ago, wrote an opinion piece in Next Avenue recently. It was called 3 Ways the Biden Administration Can Support Older Adults, Kids, and Families. And you talked about sort of this proposal from the administration, some $750 billion or so on child and elder care. And you outlined sort of 3 areas, sort of incentivizing intergenerational shared sites, making this sort of national service, this core civic value, and then ultimately supporting the caregivers across these generations. Obviously, when you're going to get the message out on the show, I could try to get you in the White House at some point soon. But in the meantime, let's spend a little time getting the message to the president on our show and what you would like to see if we can mobilize this $750 billion towards this issue.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's more in the water now after this most recent package. And I mean, yes, we had 3 very specific policy proposals that we thought were low-hanging fruit that needed to be addressed, but and they were easy to do, and they're relatively non-controversial and all of those types of things. Maybe even bipartisan if that's allowed anymore in this country. But I think our larger point was simply that if we're going to invest in America, we need to invest in older adults as resources. Not to see every older adult as a vulnerable person at the end of their life. When we first came into aging funding, we invited one of the best known funders, and I'll keep their name out at this point, but one of the best known funders, foundations, to come speak to our board to educate us, because we were thirsty for knowledge on what's happening in the aging world. And this foundation sent one of their program officers who was 10 times smarter than I will ever be. And he came in and he said, if you want to work in aging, the 3 most important issues that you can work in are palliative care, fall prevention, and elder abuse. And I could see the look on my board as they just tuned out completely of, that's not what we think of when we think of aging. Lord knows we need people, unfortunately, working in all 3 of those areas, and I'm glad this foundation is still doing it. But it's not for us. We want to look at older Americans as a resource, as people who can be utilized, as people who can be put back to work, who can be recruited as volunteers, as tutors, as mentors, as role models, as people who can go back into the workforce or stay in the workforce and bring a new perspective or an old perspective to your office culture, who have that been there, done that fact. And at our own detriment, we look at that population as finished and needing to be warehoused. So, our point to President Biden was, as you're looking at aging and you're looking at what do you have on your table as resources and what do you have on your table as deficits, please don't just put all seniors over into the deficit pile and say we have to figure out ways how to pay for them. Please look for ways to figure out how do we put them to use as an asset for this country, because as we said before, they're living longer, they're living healthier, and we can choose to look at them as a detriment to society, or we can look at them as people who have so much left to offer. And we do think that it's relevant that we made that pitch to a 78-year-old president, saying you got the most powerful job in the country, if not the world, and you don't think you've slipped. So why on earth would we think that this other population of seniors has completely slipped? And why aren't we figuring out ways to put them back into the public schools? Why into our care centers and being utilized as a resource? And so we had very specific policy examples, but they're all based on this idea of seniors as assets and resources to be tapped for the betterment of our country during what is obviously, a crisis mode. Yep. And it'd just be irresponsible from the government level to say, all hands on deck, except for those of you who are over 70, go stand over there. We need them. So let's figure out ways to put them to work.
Mm-hmm. And, thinking about our government a little bit here, obviously, there's the White House. We just talked about that. But, earlier in your career, before pre-Eisner Foundation, you were involved in the Social Security Administration. You worked for a congressman who was very powerful in the Ways and Means Committee. As you think back this year of your government experience and looking forward, because we do a lot of aging themes on this show, and not just intergenerational, age tech, longevity biotech. Everyone's always saying, how do we get the government more interested in this stuff? Trent, how do we get the government more interested in this stuff? Are there other ways, obviously, besides getting Trent Stamp into the White House, to sort of push things on the government front?
Yeah, of course. But I do think that the part of that is on us at the foundation level and at the corporate philanthropy level, to create models that we can show they work, and then you as a government can take them to scale. So I think that at the foundation level, at the private level, we should be as entrepreneurial as possible. We should be trying things that are, a little out of the box that would never pass a Senate hearing on the first time. But like I said before, the reason we came to intergenerational programs, the reason we came to healthy aging in this particular way, is that we saw unbelievably how well it worked. It wasn't just that it's nice, but it's necessary. If the goal really was to raise third grade reading scores, like I said before, we found, and we were presented with, 25 organizations that sole purpose was to go into LA public schools and try to raise third grade reading scores. The one that was doing it the best was Reading Partners and Experience Corps out here in LA, that were programs that were specifically designed to recruit 60 plus volunteers to serve as those soldiers in that army. They were better volunteers. They were more stable. They came back more often. They stayed longer. They had a been there, done that factor to them. They were less likely to get up and walk out of the room if a kid called them a name or something, because they'd heard it before 40 years ago. That's fine. Shut up and sit down, young man. We're here to work. They're not there to pad their resume so they can get into grad school. They're there to make the world a better place. And so I just think it's our job at the foundation world to pile up these types of examples, invest in these smaller programs, these smaller intergenerational programs, so that other people can then go to the government and say, look, it worked. Here's the data. It's better than whatever on earth you were thinking about doing before. Not only are we helping kids, we're helping seniors, and we're doing it efficiently. The motto for foster grandparents, which is exactly what it sounds like, is every dollar spent twice. That resonates at the government level, because it becomes a social safety net program for vulnerable seniors who want to serve as grandparents, who need that kind of activity in their lives. and it serves as an early childhood education program for kids who could use that help. So why aren't we looking at these kinds of hybrid intergenerational programs? And so at the foundation level, we'll keep investing in them, and we'll keep taking them to our state and national governments and saying, look, this really works. And hopefully over time, we'll add more and more of them to the federal and state portfolios.
Appreciate that. Trent, what other question? Obviously, intergenerational is a big thing for the foundation. You have a variety of other programs, and one that stood up because I know that Mr. Eisner also wrote a book on this, and sort of his experience at summer camp. And then you have this one part of your program focused on Camp Key Wayden. So just talk for a couple of minutes about Mr. Eisner's sort of experience in summer camp, and there's some parallels there, I believe, in terms of I went to camp for many years, and the things I learned, I still remember it, and I didn't learn them from other kids. I learned them from people that are really good at camping and and knew these skills. Let's talk about that for a couple of minutes, if you would.
Yeah, I got to tell you, this was the biggest eye opener when I got the opportunity to come to work and run the Eisner Foundation in Southern California. I grew up in Oakland, in the Bay Area in California. We don't have this camp culture, or we certainly didn't where I was living and where I was at the time. But for a large percentage of people who grew up in the Northeast primarily, camp is a way of life, and it's yes, there are fancy camps for rich kids, but there are way cheaper camps for kids who aren't as advantaged. And just going away to camp and the skills that you learn at those particular places is just something that I was not familiar with. So the Eisners have a multiple generation history with this one particular camp in Vermont. Michael's father went, Michael went, all of their kids went, the grandkids are now going. And this particular camp is just like the camp that I would see in a movie, where nothing has changed since the early 1900s. And there is no technology allowed, and they're still singing the silly songs and doing the campfires and have all those crazy little rituals and the secret language and the initiation. I don't even know because I'm not I'm not of them. But one of the things that we do at the foundation is we send between 15 and 20 kids from Southern California, all of them first generation Latino kids, primarily from Mexico, who don't have this kind of opportunity to go to this particular camp, because Michael and his family believe that the skills that they acquired at this particular camp and the relationships that they made at those particular camps are some of the single largest determinants that then led to their success in life. More important than their high schools or their colleges or their their early internships was their camp experience. And they have been insistent since I arrived 13 years ago that we still find 15 kids from low-income neighborhoods who go off to this camp for a full month, 28 days. If you matriculate all the way through for 4 years, and we'll pay for the whole thing all the way through. At the end of that, when you become 16, they go for 8 weeks, and then they can become counselors, and it just becomes this way of life, and they're part of this alumni network and the whole thing. And I got to tell you, the one thing that I love about the camp ideal and the particular groups that we send is, again, it's kids from a neighborhood that is really challenged. They're all first generation Mexican American kids, and they get off to this camp that is it's expensive, and it's mostly kids from the Northeast. It takes about 4 hours for the acclimation and the assimilation, and everything to happen. If you're good at shooting the arrow, if you're good at rowing that canoe, if you can find your way out of the forest, nobody cares where you come from or what your background is or what's going on. It is a self-contained world where it's about brotherhood and sisterhood. And if you're good at camp, then you're good with everybody else. And I like that. I like that it really does seem to level the playing field and give some of the kids that we've worked with an opportunity that they wouldn't normally have had to not only experience the outdoors and this fraternity and this sorority, but to meet hopefully some lifelong connections that will serve them well in their later years.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I enjoyed reading about that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's part of the family. I mean, as I tell, my staff all the time, when we're out there and, we're talking to Harvard Business Review or to you and doing your show or presenting and the whole thing. We run a foundation, but we run a family foundation. And the name is still on the door, and the ideals and the beliefs and the core ethics that make that family are something that we integrate into our work every day. And camp is a big part of who they are.
Yeah, really cool. Trent, obviously, we've been shut down for a while the last year, but things are beginning to open up now. Any big presentations, conferences you're going to be at? Anything you want to announce here first to the world? Obviously, nothing confidential, but please take the floor if there's any other initiatives that are coming up that you want to talk about.
I am ready to get out. I've had the opportunity to do, much presenting and speaking in the last year, but it's all been, unfortunately, looking at somebody on a screen from either my office where I am today or my garage where I have spent most of my time for the last few years. So I have some speaking engagements lined up for later this summer, and we're going to do a few things, but nothing that will immediately move the needle. If I could plug one thing, it would be the series that we have done with Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is a 12-part series on the multi-generational moment and the multi-generational movement under the theory that we innovated ourselves into this kind of separation by age. We used to educate people in a one-room classroom, across ages, older people, younger people, but we found it to be more efficient to break them out by age. We used to live in multi-generational houses and multi-generational communities, and we found that we would innovate away and create senior homes and senior housing centers and senior communities and that kind of thing. And we did this to the workforce. We created mandatory retirement ages and Social Security, which were primarily to get older workers out of the workforce. So we created this innovation to segregate ourselves by age. There's nothing natural about it. It's not natural to segregate by age. It's not biological in any way whatsoever. And we're finding that there is a thirst on behalf of a lot of people to bring the ages back together. More and more people are living together across age. Some of it's because of COVID, but some of it's just because, it's easier, it's cheaper to keep your kids there for a while, or to bring in a college student if you're a senior and let them live there so you can keep your house longer and stay in your own home and those types of things. We're finding multi-generational workforces are being valued by corporations. We're finding that a lot of our universities are trying to figure out ways to either put their college kids into senior housing. If you're a gerontology student at USC, you live in a senior center. Why wouldn't you? It makes all the sense in the world. So we're finding that people are trying to innovate their way back into a more cohesive, more intergenerational society. And Mark Friedman, who runs encore.org, and is one of our longtime partners, he and I somehow or another convinced Stanford Social Innovation Review to let us edit a 12-part series on innovations in multi-generational programming. And so, and we then went out and we wrote a couple pieces. I wrote one on philanthropy. Mark's writing one on older workers. We got Donna Butts to write about shared sites, with Shannon Jarrett of Ohio State, where you put, a preschool inside a senior center or that type of thing. But we went around and got some of the smartest people in the country to write pieces for us on housing, the workforce, pre-K, foster care, colleges, all these different kinds of things on, how do we make them more intergenerational? What are the cool innovations in that particular world? And so we have this 12-part series running in Stanford Social Innovation Review right now, one article a week. It's free to read online. So, if I can convince people to just go check out the multi-generational series on SSIR, edited by Mark Friedman and I. You can just Google it and look at for it by that. It'll all pop up. You can read all 12 or 13 articles. That's been a massive amount of work. And we're very proud of the quality, and we're hope that it will reach the right audience where people will say, hey, why don't, I'm a housing developer. I haven't thought about this before. Hey, I run a college. I haven't thought about this before. And hopefully we can get people to spur some innovation in the intergenerational, multi-generational world.
Really great. And we'll put that in the bio and link to it. So that's awesome.
Right. It's good work. It's good work. People, people should find it because, you'll find an article that will resonate with you no matter what industry you're in.
Outstanding. Really great stuff, Trent. It's a fascinating portfolio. Really rooting you on to continuing this, and glad you're going to be getting out and spreading more of the words of these initiatives to the world. And once again, very impressive. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Trent Stamp, Chief Executive Officer of the Eisner Foundation, identifying, advocating for, and investing in high-quality, innovative programs to unite multiple generations for the enrichment of our community and really bringing back that intergenerational, multi-generational society that can do so much for everybody. Trent, it was a great time spending time with you. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for everything you're doing there. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. Really impressive stuff.
Thank you, Ira. It's been a pleasure. And again, I do want to just put a bow on it by thank you for your advocacy on behalf of healthy aging and intergenerational programs. And first trip I get back east, you and I should go get a cheesesteak. So
absolutely, right around the corner.
I'm coming for it. Let's do it.
Will do.